Hello and welcome to week 10. Can you believe week 10 already? Wow, you guys are learning so very, very much. So first, I want to apologize for doing this right to recording, but I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow that kind of came up, and so I figured you would understand, but I didn't want you to miss the learning opportunity, okay? And I'm always available to you in email. I promise you a response within 24 hours. Okay. So let's talk about the nervous system. What do you say? Now, the nervous system is identified in two parts. There's the nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. And then in a bit, we're going to talk about the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral. Okay. All right. So let's see what's going on in this noggin here. All right. So, the brain is like central headquarters. This is mission control. And if you've ever seen the movie Inside Out, absolutely fabulous. I definitely recommend it. But Inside Out talks about emotions, whereas here we're talking about the physical nature of the human body and what controls what. Okay, so as you can see here, the brain is now, it's really not pretty colors inside your skull, okay? But we do this in the illustration so you can see the different lobes, because that's how we refer to the brain in parts, and the sections are known as lobes. Okay. Now, some people use the word cerebrum and brain interchangeably, but they're not really the same thing. Okay. The cerebrum is only a part of the brain. Isn't that interesting? But, things tend to become common information, common knowledge, or yeah, you want to call it common knowledge, but it's not actually accurate knowledge. And people just start, to use those terms when they're not actually accurate. But as you know, in medical terminology, we are very specific in the meanings of the terms. We are very specific in what we're doing and how we are discussing the part of the body that is affected by whatever the condition is, the diagnosis, and how we're going to treat that particular part of the body. Okay. So the parts of the brain are essentially, as I said, referred to as lobes. So we have the frontal lobe, which are right here. They're like above your eyebrows, behind your forehead. Frontal, see, frontal lobes in the front. Okay, so these lobes are primarily involved in autonomic functions, and that's the involuntary. That's the part of your nervous system that does stuff without you telling it to. Okay, so for example, it's the nervous system that makes your heart beat, the contractions of your heart to beat and push the blood through as it goes through. That's the responsibility of the nervous system. Okay. And that's very important. The fact that you're breathing is part of the autonomic nervous system, because you don't sit there and say, breathe in, breathe out. I mean, except when you're at the doctor or maybe you're taking a Zumba class. But you know what I'm saying, right? Is you breathe as you need to. This is not an issue of you having to tell your respiratory system intake, exhale, right? Unlike the part of your brain that requires actual control, voluntary movements, voluntary muscle movements, such as I want to pick up this pen. So I'm telling my muscles, my nerves to tell my muscles to outreach my hand to grab onto this pen. Okay, and see, it happens so smoothly. That's because you have good frontal lobes. Good job. Okay. Also, motor areas for speech, personality, which is why sometimes you'll see in the movies, you know, the bad guy is actually misbehaving because they had frontal lobe damage. Okay. All right. Then the border lines between the lobes are called fissures. Okay. The medical term is sulcus, S-U-L-C-U-S. So between the frontal lobes and the parietal lobes, you have the sulcus, the fissure of Rolando, the central sulcus. Okay. And that lies between the frontal lobes and the parietal lobe. Okay, so horizontally. The parietal lobes give you the ability to interpret and coordinate sensory information. So that means when you touch something, it's hot, it's cold, it's hard, it's soft. That's your parietal lobes working. Good job, huh? Now, what's really interesting is, of course, you have two parietal lobes, one on the right side and one on the left side. But what's interesting is the right parietal lobe processes sensory data from the left side of your hand. And the left parietal lobe processes data from the right side of your hand, opposites. Isn't that weird? I didn't invent this. Okay. Then we have the fissure of Sylvius, which is a lateral sulcus, okay, that goes between the temporal lobe and the frontal and parietal lobes. Okay, so the temporal lobes, you know how you call this your temple, right? And this part of your glasses is called the temple, right? So temple not in as in a place of worship, but temple as in the sides, your temporal lobes, which fit around your ears, okay, provide you with your senses, smell, taste, and hearing, as well as interpretation of spoken language. So if someone begins to not understand what you're saying, all of a sudden, it could be an injury of the temporal lobes. And then in the back, we have the occipital. Okay, see, my mic went with me. Okay, that occipital, the occipital lobe. And that processes visual impulses. It does make so much sense. You see, this is just like any other good working corporation, right? We have different sections of the control tower that are responsible for different functions of the body. It makes perfect sense. And it's all happening right here, right now, in your brain. Okay. Now we have the spinal cord. The spinal cord attaches to the brain right here at C1, right? Do you remember that from when we studied the skeletal system? C1, right? Cervical first vertebrae. That's where the spinal cord connects to the brain. And as you know, it runs down the spine, the spinal column, but inside. Remember when we looked at the individual vertebrae, when we talked about the skeletal system, there was a hole in the center of the vertebrae. That's for the spinal cord to go from the top here, the base of the brain, all the way down up to your waist, L1 or L2. That's where the spinal cord ends. Isn't that interesting? It doesn't go all the way. It stops right there at L1 or L2. And of course, it's protected by the spine, the bones of the spine, right? That makes so much sense. Okay, so then we have nerves because remember we were going to talk about peripheral, okay? And the spinal nerves to help give you feeling and activity in your arms and your legs, as well as your lower torso, your tushy, right, from your waist down, has to do with the spinal nerves as they reach through into the peripheral, okay? So what we're looking at are those additional segments at the very bottom, known as the cauda equina. We'll get to that in a minute. All right, so you have cervical nerves, 8 pairs of cervical nerves, numbered C1 through C8, originating from each of the 7 cervical vertebrae and the first thoracic vertebra. Okay, so there's an overlap. C8 nerve comes from T1 vertebra. Okay, all right. It's okay, because when you learn it, when you study it, when you review it over and over again, you'll figure it out, okay? And for the most part, you don't even have to worry about memorizing this as long as you understand how to do your resources, use your resources, and when you review and you review and you review, it will stick in your head, okay? Thoracic nerves, T1 through T12. Remember, there are 12 thoracic vertebrae, right? And therefore, we also have the thoracic spinal nerves that become intercostal nerves. You remember from medical terminology class, oh wait, this is medical terminology class. Intercostal refers to not a house on the beach, that would be intercoastal. This is intercostal, which are the spaces between the ribs of the rib cage, okay? All right, then you have your lumbar nerves, L1 through L5, originating from the lumbar vertebra. And remember, in most people, L1, L2, right around your waist, okay? Then you have your sacral nerves. And this is interesting because remember when we were talking about the skeletal system, and we talked about how babies are born with 300 bones, but by the time you get to adulthood, you only have 206 bones. Where do those other bones go? Well, the original 5 sacral vertebrae that an infant neonate has when they're born, by the time you cross over into your 20s, those 5 sacral vertebrae will merge into 1. Okay. Remember, we talked about this when we talked about the skeletal system. All right. So now instead of 5, we have only 1 bone, the sacral vertebra, but you still have 5 pairs of nerves coming out of that they do not merge. They do not stay. They stay 5 individual. And then the coccyx, the coccygeal nerves, 1 pair originating at the coccyx. Remember, the coccyx is your tailbone. You know, if you've ever fallen on your bum, you know exactly where that tailbone is. Okay, now the nerves, as they come from the bottom of the, and I wish I did not include a picture of this, and I should have, I apologize. As the nerve, the spinal cord comes to an end at L1, you might say, well, what about these sacral nerves and the coccygeal nerves? And what about the nerves that then go into your legs, right? Those are all clustered and come off the end of the spinal cord, and it's collectively known as the cauda equina. And the reason for that is equina refers to a horse. Cauda equina refers to a horse's tail. And if you've ever seen a horse's tail, as it comes off the back of the horse, it kind of goes like this. And then, of course, the tail spreads out, right? Excuse me. That's exactly what the nerves do. It's fascinating. All right, so in the peripheral nervous system, we're going to start back in the brain because these are the nerves that conduct all the stuff that has to go on throughout your body. Because remember, is the nervous system is like the wiring, right? The wiring in a house. Okay, but the wiring still has to connect to some kind of source to put energy into that wiring as well as to control the wiring, you know, like an on-off switch, right? Some of these things, like the automatic nervous system, you don't want an off switch. No, okay. But you do have these control factors that connect up into your brain because your brain still has to interpret how the nerves are going to function. Okay. So you have these source points in the brain and the 12 nerves and what each one is in charge of. And then also collected it at specific points down the spinal cord are what are called plexuses. And this is kind of a master outlet, okay, that plugs in extra nerves that then go out. So your cervical plexuses put out the nerves into your arms and your hands and your fingers, okay? Brachial plexus, which is going to be in the middle of your torso, which is going to come out into your torso, your body, and then you have your lumbosacral plexuses, which are going to deal with the lower half of your body. Okay. All right. So again, this actually is the most important slide of every one of the presentations I've done for you, because reviewing often is the key to understanding this information, remembering what you need to, okay? As you are here learning, use a medical dictionary. Don't move forward on a, I think that's what that means. Go find out. And I promise you, like the fourth or fifth time you look up the same word, it's going to stick in your brain and you won't ever have to look it up again. And absolutely query when necessary. If you don't understand something you're reading in the textbook, if you don't understand what is the connection, what is the relevance, how does this work, please, in class, query me. Send me an email and say, huh? Well, I'm going to need a little more detail than that, but you understand what I'm saying, right? Okay. I promise you a response within 24 hours. And then also remember, you have a tutor for medical terminology here available to you. Just email her at this email address and make an appointment, and she's going to help you. And plus, I'm here. Response in 24 hours. We can email back and forth. We can speak on the phone. We can do an appointment, do Zoom, private one-on-one Zoom, FaceTime, whatever makes you happy. I'm here for you. Okay. So have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next Thursday at usual time. Okay. Thanks for understanding about my appointment. Bye.